Fox News. Sarah Silverman says she's become less political because no one wants to hear from celebrities anymore. Liberal comic said it wouldn't have made a difference if she'd been more outspoken this election. I wonder if the real story is that no one wants to hear from you.
Maybe, but I feel like it's a win either way.
Yeah, I think the reality is we have basically had such a decisive win in the culture war that the enemy has been routed. They have fallen from their horses and are fleeing and scattering in random directions.
There was a lot of news coming out this week. Look, George Clooney blames Obama for basically turning him into a patsy. And
you left me with the bag.
You left him holding the bag. That's what he said. And there was another article came out today that the activist class in Hollywood is basically they're taking a step back now, and what they're going to do in the future is focus on local elections because they want to keep pushing abortion and climate change propaganda and stuff like that. And for these actors and actresses, look, last week we had Alec Baldwin and we had Sharon Stone calling all of America, half of America, idiots for who they voted for, while condescendingly telling them, well, you don't even have a passport. How could you possibly know what's good for you? These people never learn. Like, this is actually, like, as much as we make fun of it, this is actually a certain amount of self-reflection that's honestly pretty rare amongst them.
Do you think that wokeness in Hollywood is being diminished?
No.
You think it's getting worse?
Yeah.
No, I don't know about getting worse. I think that it ends up staying the same. I think as long as streaming services are just saddled with endless need for content, that there's too much content being made, there's too many substandard content creators that rely on it, and there's too many holes in the system to pull it out and get rid of it, meaning that, sure, at the level of big budget movies, you'll see a pullback on it in a lot of ways. If you look at the stuff that comes out, they'll go back one direction. But as soon as you go back to television, look, they've got 10,000 shows coming out and only so many good script writers. There is only one Taylor Sheridan and only a few.
Everyone else should be fired.
And everybody else should be fired, right? Yeah. But for the most part, you're not going to see it go away because it's too entrenched in the coastal elite.
I'm ready to get rid of every streaming service.
Just Paramount.
Except Paramount at this point. So I'm watching Landman, and I'm waiting for the next episode, and so I'm like, well, come on, man. Yeah. Yellowstone is like, it's messed up. It's gone. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner's not. And so then I started watching Tulsa King, and I'm like, man, this is good.
Landman and Tulsa King. What it proves to you is, like, you can tell stories that have elements of progressivism in there as long as you don't treat the characters like morons.
Right.
Right?
But Taylor's a great storyteller. Mm-hmm. I mean,
everybody go watch Sicario right now after the show.
Such an awesome movie, dude. The scene at the border.
The border.
Yeah.
It's maybe Denis Villeneuve. It's probably the greatest masterclass in tension building in cinema history. Listen for the dog. Listen for the dog barking.
Because they have what's her face in it? Emily Blunt, is that her name? She's in it, and it's wild to me that it's a great character. Mm-hmm. There's action, there's suspense, there's good writing. You can have strong women's or whatever you want. And then whenever you get these female writers and these woke writers that intentionally want to make strong women woke content, it's just miserably awful.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, when you watch that movie, it's because you see her just experience the horror of what's going on at the border. And she is not there to be the strong, independent woman. She's there to look at the horrors of what's going on in the drug war and be the audience's eyes.
Did you see that meme where it's like men writing women? And it shows like Ripley from Alien and like Katniss Everdeen, and this says women writing women, and it's She-Hulk twerking.
It's like men writing lawyers. It's men writing lawyers and stuff like that. Yeah.
Sicario is the dinner scene, right?
Yeah. At the very end.
Man.
Yeah, exactly.
That movie's so good.
The first time I saw it, I was like, what the fuck?
I know. Yeah. Look, I almost peed on myself when I was like, I can't believe he just did that.
I don't know. With like the success of Yellowstone, everybody was talking about how it's like, look, it's not woke. And it's the biggest show right now. And people were claiming that it was like Game of Thrones for conservatives or whatever. And then Costner left. And now the show is just, I don't even know what the show is at this point. I'm not going to watch it.
I mean, neither.
But I'm like, these shows that are massively successful, like all of Sheridan's shows, they are not woke. And there's an element critical. Landman, I didn't even know Landman came out until that viral scene where he's talking to that woman and he's explaining how wind turbines, and it's such amazing writing. Mm-hmm. Things you don't even consider. She's in the car and she goes, green energy, what is it, like encroaching on the oil? And he's like, no, oil companies are using alternative energy to power the pumps.
Yeah.
And then she's like, what? And then he gets out and he explains the amount of, he's like, do you have any idea how much diesel it takes to get these things, to haul them out here, to put the 12 feet of concrete in the ground, to put it up? They're out here not because it's green energy, because there's no power lines to power the pumps.
Well, it's the same thing that he does,
Amazing.
that they do in Yellowstone when he explains like all of the animals that are killed to farm
Yep,
avocados
yep.
and stuff like that.
It's amazing.
All it is it takes a certain level of research
Yeah.
on their part and the ability to think past the level of a tweet. Right?
Right.
Like actually have a discussion. If you listen to his discussion with Joe Rogan and he talks about the process of writing these characters, he said all of it has to do with actually doing your research and allowing characters to be multifaceted, and they don't have to do. One of the problems with a lot of the writing in Hollywood is that if somebody has progressive ideals, they can have no flaws. They cannot be like the point now is that you need to actually be able to write characters again where you can actually be a bad guy and still be the focus of the show. I mean, like you can be a mid-level person. You can have good traits and bad traits.
But are you blurring? But is that blurring the line with bad and good?
Not in the way that
Destroying culture too, because we were talking about Thanos earlier from
Yeah.
the Marvel stuff. You know, it's like total badass. Yeah, I mean, you know, you feel for the guy. Oh man, he yeah, you know, he wouldn't help his world, you know. But when you blur that line of good and bad, there is no more good and bad anymore.
there
This
is
is
a
what they keep trying to do. I'm just so sick of it. Like, Rings of Power got roasted because they gave the orcs families and tried to justify the orcs. And it's like,
Right.
the orcs were meant to be malevolent evil and incarnate, and that was it.
Right.
One of the worst examples this year, if anybody watched the god-awful Crow reboot, which is one of the, it's an abomination. Whatever you do, don't see that movie.
I kinda wanna
like,
see
it's one of the worst things you've ever seen, right?
I
And to your point, in the original Crow, the whole point is there's an extremely poignant anti-drug message to the film that is very, very layered and important to the character because he lives in a city full of chaos, drugs, crime, and he's killed on Halloween on the eve of his wedding, which is a very, very, poignant thing to think about by criminals. And then when they make the reboot, they're like a bunch of goths who do drugs together. And it's like, did you even watch the original movie?
Bro, you got to see the Craft reboot. Have you seen that
No.
one?
No.
I recommend
no.
it. I recommend it to everybody. And then after you watch it, you're going to be like, curse you, Tim Pool. How could you? Yo, the original Craft from the 90s. It's 14 teenage girls and they're witches and then they do witch stuff and they fight
It's
each other.
cool though. I mean, it was cool.
It was fun. They basically start fighting with each other.
Yeah.
And it's like an internal conflict and you're like, wow. The new Craft, it's like one of the witches is a trans girl, so it's like a male. And then they use magic to turn the bully gay. I'm not kidding. And then the bad guy turns out to be literally the patriarchy.
Of course.
It's David Duchovny, and he's like, I'm a man, and I'm here because I'm in charge and I have the power.
Think about this. Like, this is what I'm
What are
talking
you
about. Like,
doing?
those ideas are so grandiose and stupid when all you have to do is like, wow, the oil industry's crazy. Let's write about the oil industry because this dude is black-bagged by a bunch of cartel members and then basically does a deal with them to...
Dude, Taylor Sheridan's... I'm imagining all of his shows. It's like he sees a tweet from a leftist that's really stupid. Like, we need more wind turbines to offset carbon emissions. And he went, you idiot. No. So he sits down with the executives and he's like, here's one tweet. And they're like, we could do a show about a guy who works on oil companies. And then what do they have? Two incredible scenes where it's basically explaining to the audience how dumb they are. And not like disrespectfully, making a point. So the opening scene of Landman is some of the best television I have seen in a decade. I don't know.
It's still... The rest of the series still needs to catch up to how good that opening scene is.
It was like an IPO. It starts off at $100 and then drops down to 10, and it's still good. Let me just explain without spoiling it. The opening scene of the whole show sells it so well. Billy Bob, he's black bagged. Cartel members are like, you think you can come on our land? And then he basically explains the power of the oil industry to these guys with guns. And I'm going to spoil it a little bit. They basically set it up so you know how bad these guys are. One guy shoots another guy and he kicks his body over and he's like, you're going to come on my land? And then he's basically like, the oil industry makes $6.8 million off, each acre per day. And then he's like breaking down the numbers and he's like, yeah, they're coming. And then the cartel gets scared. And that's how they're like, you know how bad the cartel is. let me explain the oil industry. And I don't want to spoil it, but you need to see it. And then he's got that should have went viral too.
Yeah.
But then there's another scene where he's basically like, wind turbines will never offset the cost of the oil that was required to make it, because you got to produce the concrete, lubricate the machine, you got to ship it, haul it, build the transmission lines for the wind. It takes so much oil to make, you'll never get that energy back.
Most television shows are tweets. His shows are threads.
Yeah.
Are actual threads just explaining exactly what's going on. It's the same thing that they did in the sequel to Sicario, which is also not as bad as a lot of people pretend it to be. But the whole point in that is that they get involved by trying to frame the cartels fighting each other and to get the U.S. government involved in the war on drugs. Right? And that's a very interesting premise as well, but it's just not quite as good as the original film because it's more personal.
Mary Kingston is Taylor's, right?
Yeah, Mary Kingston, yeah.
Same thing. I mean, you know, if you go through the first 2 episodes of that, you're stuck. You're like, oh my God. It went here, you know? I mean, and you got Hawkeye from Marvel.
Jeremy Renner.
Yeah.
Also, all of this stuff was done infinitely just as well back in the early 2000s with the show called The Wire, which everyone should go watch as well right now.
You know what? It took me a long time to watch The Wire.
Those first...
I never watched it while I was on TV. But one day I was like, okay, I'm getting sick of watching all of these other... Let me just check it out. And after the first 2, I was stuck. I was binge watching the whole
Blows your
thing.
mind.
Yeah.
And
I live in Baltimore.
And the thing is, like, that actually has a similar scene at the opening, which I thought was it was just unbelievable, where McNulty's sitting there with one of the kids that's in this gang, right? And there's a dead body there, and he's talking about throwing dice with this kid and how they let him come back week after week, even though he always tries to run off with the money. And he goes, but you know he's going to try and steal it. Why do you let him come back? He goes, you have to. This is America, man. Like that. And the whole point of the show is that it talks about the war on drugs right as the war on terror had started and all the resources had been pulled away. And that show actually had the creator of it was David Simon, like they were like arrested by local police because it made the police and the government look bad. So they were actually continuously bothered by local law enforcement because they shined a light on them that was negative, but at the same time did not portray the drug trade as something to aspire to, but rather its own enterprise with its own problems and issues. And that type of writing is just used to be far more the norm back in the golden age of television, and we're just not there anymore.
You were talking about the wokeism in Hollywood and with Sarah Silverman, and nobody really wants to hear her anymore and stuff. When Narcos, when Narcos was on for that first season, it's like, okay, I can see how that, you know, this is totally bad. And then the wokeism came in there in the second season when you thought cartels, hey, those boys are Billy badasses, man. You don't mess with them. And then all of a sudden you have a homosexual connection with one of the cartels. What the hell?
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.